Welcome back to Calculated Risk. I am Tyler Shoemaker, and we are back as the Monday episode recapping week 8. And you see our faces, so you know what happened in the Ohio State Penn State game. Otherwise, we would have been on a break here as we licked our wounds. But we are back. The Buckeyes took care of business in Columbus. A lot of other really interesting, impactful games around the country. Alabama overcomes a two-score halftime deficit to beat Tennessee. A lot of really good football this weekend. Kelly, what were your initial takeaways from week 8?
Yeah, Tyler, you hit on a couple of them there. Number one for me, Ohio State earned the biggest win of the weekend. Only a 33% chance the average top 25 team would have been expected to beat Penn State at home this past weekend. So that is the number one resume boosting win for me. Utah on the road at USC gets a great win. How about Virginia pulling off the upset at North Carolina? That's 2 weeks in a row, Tyler, that the ACC game on the CW has led to an undefeated ranked team going down. So make sure you're checking out the CW at like 6, 7 o'clock on Saturday afternoons if you're not already. And then Alabama at Tennessee was another great win. And how about Miami getting it done at home in overtime against Clemson? Those are the top 5 wins for me this week with regard to boosting your resume the most, meaning the average top 25 team would have had the smallest chance to win these games of the outcomes that we actually saw.
Yeah, I love the way you measure that. I think that really puts it in perspective, makes it really easy to digest for the casual fan. They're like, oh, okay, that was a really good win. That matches what, maybe intuitively people think. All right, well, let's get into what this weekend meant in terms of the power ratings in the TSI and the KFord ratings. As we talked about last week, I mean, I think this week even more so. When you look at these, if you're watching on YouTube, you see the graphics up. Our numbers are really starting to get very similar, very close, not just in terms of how we're ranking the teams, but the actual rating number above or below average are starting to get really close. I know someone had called out, with mine in particular, on Twitter, like, how is Kansas State, number 11, which, Kelly, you've got them number 14. So ranking, they're a little bit lower for you, but in terms of their rating, we have the exact same rating on them at 17.7 points above average. So that made me feel much better. Ole Miss is another team that I've called this out. I kind of think, or at least I felt like my numbers are maybe a little high on them, but I mean, your rating on them is actually even higher than mine is. So again, we're kind of in line there. The models are kind of seeing the same thing with the Rebels, despite their kind of no-show performance against Alabama. We're going to find out a lot about them. I was looking at their schedule here this morning. They've got their next 2 games, I believe, are A&M and another, maybe LSU. They played LSU. Sorry, their next 2 games. I know I was thinking, like, man, if they get through that, like they're going to be in a pretty good spot.
They got Vanderbilt. They got Vanderbilt at home this week, Tyler. So that should, now we never know in college football. That should be okay. It's the 2 games. It's the 2 games after that, though. They're home to A&M and at Georgia. You want to say you're a real contender in college football? Win both of those games, and then and then everyone, not just the models, but everyone will be taking you very seriously.
Yeah, that Georgia game is going to be very interesting. Kelly, anything, or what jumped out the most to you in comparing our ratings here?
Yeah, I think, for me, Tyler, it starts at the top. And both of us, we have a new number 1 this week. Last week, I had Ohio State. Last week, you had Oklahoma. We now both have Michigan at number 1 in the power ratings. I know it's a team we've talked about before and how, hey, there's some other models out there that really seem to like the Wolverines. Ours, maybe not so much earlier in the year, but now both of our models have come around. We both have Michigan number 1 in the entire country, and they've looked pretty darn dominant down the stretch here. Michigan, of course, still has their most difficult games to play with both Penn State and Ohio State still coming up. Tyler, we have the same top 4, albeit in a different order. People said I got my Big Ten East blinders on Twitter because I got Michigan 1, Ohio State 2, Penn State 3. Yeah, I'm not like putting in anything extra. Trust me, if I was, I wouldn't have Michigan number 1. I don't like Michigan, but hey, they're a really good football team right now and they're the best in the country by my numbers. So that's just the way it shakes out. We've got the same top 4. My Oklahoma in there at number 4. You've got them number 2. Even Florida State at number 5 for both of us. So at the very top, teams are the same. And then as we get down farther than that, as you said, there's a good correlation there. Things that still, stick out a little bit. I've got Alabama at 8. You now have them at number 14. I've got a G5 in the top 30 now, Tyler, for the first time all year. I got SMU at number 26. So still not quite as high as you have SMU at number 18. And you've got Liberty in there still, and Air Force and James Madison. Those teams for me still lurking in the 30s or 40s. So to me, though, like you said, a lot of similarities in terms of teams and then their ranking and then their rating as well as we look at the top here. Not a ton of surprises. I've got LSU all the way up to number 6, Tyler. That's interesting for a team that has 2 losses. And again, in the power rating world, we don't care about the wins and losses. It's about how you're playing, and that's relative to what would be expected of you given the opponent and the location of the game. But it's still just, I like to track, where's my highest 1-loss team? Where's my highest 2-loss team? Where's my highest 3-loss team? It's just fun to track. And LSU for me, you've got them number 9. For me, they're number 6 this week.
Yeah, and when I updated my numbers and I saw they were number 9, I was like, "Ooh, man, that might be high," because I don't have in front of me where I had them last week, but I think they're maybe in the mid to low teens, perhaps. But yeah, so to see you, and you've got them with a 22.7 rating. I've got them at 19.5, so we're within a field goal there. Yeah, I mean they've really turned it on. I've actually got their offense now as the number 1 unit overall in the country. They passed up. Oklahoma had a pretty subpar performance this week, so they dropped to number 2 overall for me. Their offense also dropped to number 2 after it had been number 1. But yeah, I mean, you mentioned we've got the same top 5 here, and even like I said, when you look at the ratings themselves, I mean, we're not too terribly far off on any of those. I mean, we're about 3 points off on Oklahoma, 3 points off on Michigan, or 2.5 points apart on Michigan. But again, number 1 for both of us. So the numbers are really kind of getting in lockstep, except like we've discussed before, like the G5, we tend to have a discrepancy there. Although I am happy to see you have SMU up there, because that's another team that they've been pretty high for me throughout, and I'm like, is that, I don't know how to feel about that, but they had a nice performance Friday night against Temple. Really took it to them. Temple's kind of a corpse at this point, I think, but nonetheless, they definitely handled their business there. So I mean, a lot of these games down the stretch, looking at who we've got power rated high, and these teams still have to play each other. It's going to be awesome. I mean, the Ohio State Penn State game was awesome. Not obviously we got the desired outcome there for our liking, but I mean, I thought both teams showed quite a bit, especially obviously on the defensive side. I think both those defenses are really good. I think both offenses and both quarterbacks have a lot of room for growth and development. I mean, both guys missed a lot of throws that were there. But credit to the defenses. The defenses looked great. I mean, that looked very, SEC of the past, where you've had Alabama defenses, Georgia defense. That's what the Ohio State and Penn State defenses look like to me.
No doubt. And it's interesting too, Tyler, from the result of that game, for me, Ohio State's power rating goes up, but their ranking goes down because Michigan improved that much more. Penn State's rating went down and their ranking went up because Oklahoma fell but behind them there. So teams that, again, win, lose, your rating, your ranking movement, it can be different. That's why I include both on there. But absolutely, there's going to be a ton of great games down the stretch with these highly power rated teams. And really, Tyler, now, I mean, we've got one more Saturday in October before we get to the college football playoff rankings for the first time. And then, in the stretch run in November, that's all anyone's talking about is what does this do to the rankings? Where's my team at there? These games are certainly going to inform those rankings, which I know we're going to touch on here. And that's how we build resumes. It's just keep in mind, it doesn't matter what your opponent's rank. Sorry, it shouldn't matter what your opponent's ranking is at the time you played them, at the end of the year. Opponents' rankings should not matter in terms of building a resume. It should all come back to these power ratings, because a team like LSU, for example, they can have 2 losses and be ranked in the mid-teens, but I'm telling you, I think they're the 6th best team in the country. Tyler's telling you, I think he thinks they're the 9th best team in the country. If Alabama beats LSU, they should get credit in 2 weeks. They should get credit for beating number 6 or number 9, depending on which rating set you're looking at. Or you aggregate them. That's an even better idea. Pull them all in together and see what's their aggregated power rating. That's the credit Alabama should get, not beating LSU ranked number whatever they're going to be, 11, 12, 13, wherever they are in that range. So just keep that in mind as we're coming down the stretch and you're talking about quote unquote top 25 wins and record versus top 25. please do me a favor and just get those things out of your vocabulary. It's much better. It's much better practice to use the power rating. So had to get that in there because we're getting ready to talk about these resumes and college football playoff rankings and all of that. And everyone likes to boast what their record is against the top 25. Just don't do it.
Yeah. Ranked wins is like, I really just want to mute that word on that phrase on Twitter. Again, not to get on our soapbox again, but my God, it's such an arbitrary, like the top 25 is such an arbitrary thing. So beating number 25 is so much better than beating number 26. It doesn't make any sense, especially from a power rating perspective. Those teams could be separated by 1/10 of a point or 100th of a point, but you get so much more credit for beating someone just because of their rank. It doesn't make any sense. But,
and if you're playing power rated 26 on the road, it's 99% more likely that that's a more difficult game, a more difficult win than number 25 power rated at home. So that's what, drawing arbitrary lines in the sand, 25, 20, 15, 10, 5, it doesn't matter. I've seen people talk about top 50 record against winning opponents, like record against 500 or better. What are we talking about here? Because you could play a team out of the MAC that's 7-5 and say, oh, that's a win versus a team that's got a winning record. Or you can play a team out of the SEC that's 5-7. I'm going to go out on a limb and say I think the team that's 5-7 from the SEC is probably a better team than the team that's 7-5 in the MAC. But if you're looking at what's your record against teams with winning records, like you're going to get credit for the MAC win, but not the SEC win. Like, just doesn't make any sense, Tyler.
Yeah. I mean, maybe in the NFL, like that could be an okay shorthand because there's more parity. But in college football, as we know, all schedules are not the same. All wins are not the same. So please, we're not saying that power ratings are the end all be all and like whatever, but it's way more of an indicator of a team's strength than any of the human poll ranking stuff that gets talked about. But yeah, that'll be fun when those rankings come out. We'll have to do something and do a comparison either here on the channel or maybe we can do like a spaces or something like that. But I think that would be cool. Kelly, anything else from the power rating perspective before we get into how these resumes updated for us?
No, let's do it, man. Let's hear about your resumes.
All right, so resume ranking. And again, like this is a new-ish formula for me. This was not the primary intent of putting my numbers together, so bear with me. I'm pretty comfortable with how it shook out, but my top 10 resumes right now, again, this is where we are rewarding wins and losses and actually factoring that into the equation. Florida State number 1, Ohio State number 2, Oklahoma number 3, Washington number 4, Michigan number 5, Texas number 6, Alabama number 7, Ole Miss number 8, James Madison number 9, and Georgia number 10. So obviously the outlier there, James Madison. But according to my numbers, James Madison's average opponent power rating minus 4.6, Georgia's average opponent power rating minus 6.9. So James Madison, according to my numbers, has played a team that's almost a field goal better on average than what Georgia's played to this point. So I've got them ahead of the Dogs in my resume rankings.
Which, when you say it like that, Tyler, I think it's kind of wild to consider that a team out of the Sun Belt versus a team out of the SEC who's played a more difficult schedule to date. That's interesting. And we agree on a lot of things here, Tyler, a lot of the same teams in the top 10. My top 10 here, I've got Ohio State. They are now number 1. They were number 4 last week. The win at home against Penn State, enough to improve their resume to the point that they have now jumped to the top of my most deserving. Florida State holds its number 2 spot for me. Oklahoma, who has previously been my number 1, they have fallen to number 3 for me. It's very close at the top, but that's my top 3 with Washington at number 4, down 1 spot. Here's where I've got a swap to make, Tyler, from what the most deserving rankings say versus what my ballot would be if I was an AP voter or a CFP selection committee member. The most deserving rankings, which holistically view the entire schedule and say, how is your record against your schedule relative to what would be expected of the average top 25 team if they played that schedule? I've got Alabama number 5 and Texas number 6. Now, because those two teams played each other, people always say, well, Kelly, your most deserving rankings are terrible because Team A beat Team B, but you got Team B ranked ahead of Team A. Like, you can't do that. And I don't know what to say to those people anymore other than one game does not make a resume. Like, it takes everything into account. And I can't honor head-to-head everywhere because the transitive property doesn't apply to college football predictive analytics or really, results-based analytics either in most cases. Here's a case that I can apply it. I've got, again, the most deserving says Alabama 5, Texas 6. So they're right next to each other. Those teams played. They actually played in Tuscaloosa, and Texas won the game. Like, to me, I'm flipping those two because there's no other team that is being unjustly punished or unjustly rewarded by me making that swap. Like, if the teams are separated by more than one and there's other teams in between, now you're either rewarding a team outside of these two who didn't deserve it, or you're punishing a team outside of these two that didn't deserve it if you're trying to move teams around and figure out who goes where. So to me, most deserving says Alabama 5, Texas 6. I'd flip those if I had a ballot because nobody else is impacted, and those two teams played each other head-to-head. Ole Miss is number 7. Michigan, number 8 for me, so they're a bit farther down than they are for you. I have Georgia 9, and Utah is number 10. James Madison, for me, Tyler, comes in at number 14. So still, I think the AP has them at 25, I think I saw, which, again, hey, at least they're finally, quote, ranked. But again, they were 26 last week. You're talking about one spot between, and this goes back to our record versus top 25. Last week, nobody cared because they were number 26. It didn't count. They were the first team receiving votes. Now they're number 25, and all of a sudden, now they're a ranked team. Like, it's one spot. What are we talking about here? And it doesn't change how good of a team they are, where the AP has them ranked, where I have them ranked in most deserving, where you have them ranked in the resume. It doesn't change how good the team is, which is how we should be assigning credit. One more swap I want to mention. I know we're not going beyond the top 10. Most deserving actually has Missouri number 11 and LSU number 12. I'd swap those two, just like I said about Texas and Alabama, because those two teams played on the field. LSU won that game. No one's getting punished or rewarded outside of these two teams by making that swap. So most deserving says Missouri should be 11, LSU should be 12. I'd flip those two to honor the head-to-head. Again, you can't honor head-to-head, or you shouldn't honor head-to-head in every single case. And in this case, I'm talking about a 2-loss LSU versus a 1-loss Missouri. That's another thing people say. They have the same record. You have to honor the head-to-head. Well, no, one, I don't have to do anything. But two, I don't need to honor the head-to-head because, again, not every record is created equal. Not every schedule is the same. So just because two teams, for example, are 7-1, that doesn't mean, and they played each other, that doesn't mean that their overall bodies of work are necessarily in line with the team that won that game is better. I'm telling you, in this case, the team that has 2 losses is only right behind the team that has 1 loss. Granted, the team that has 1 loss, that 1 loss is to the team with 2 losses. I'd flip those two to honor the head-to-head in this case because no one else is hurt. But that's putting a 2-loss team ahead of a 1-loss team. And people say, well, they beat them, so I'm good with it. People get themselves in these pretzels, these intellectual pretzels that they get lost in their own, kind of rationale as I go back and forth with them. So I've kind of stopped doing that, and it doesn't usually work anyway. So there's my top 10, actually my top 12, with James Madison sitting number 14. So yeah, Tyler, it's that time of year. I'm sure people will get mad. It's on Twitter. I'm sure people get mad about, Michigan being number 8 and undefeated, Georgia being number 9 and undefeated. If these teams continue to win, and again, Michigan's a really good team, they're number 1 in the power ratings. If these teams continue to win, their resume rankings, their most deserving ranking, will react accordingly, and they will continue to move up. Michigan has their 2 biggest games in front of them. Georgia has their biggest game or games in front of them. Like, it's okay, Michigan and Georgia fans. You don't need to be ranked number 1 right now. If anything, I'm giving you more motivation for these teams and bulletin board material for these teams to go out and be pissed off when they're playing. Like, there we go. But that's where I have them. That's how I stack them up. But yeah, man, this is what I like doing most with the ratings, is creating these resume rankings and then having thoughtful conversations with people if and when those opportunities present themselves. Not just my team should be ranked higher. Bye. Like, I don't have time for that. There's no rationale in doing that. So anyway, I love it. Ohio State 1, Florida State 2, Oklahoma 3, Washington 4. There's my top 4 after week 8.
Yeah, we've got the same top 4. And I should point out, in terms of my top, I mean, I've got a pretty clear top 2. Florida State and Ohio State are very, very close for 1 and 2. And then there's like a little bit of a drop. And then there's Oklahoma, Washington, and then another little bit of a drop. So I think Florida State and Ohio State clearly have the 2 best resumes, however you want to slice it. I don't know that you could really make an argument for anybody else from a resume standpoint. Yeah, no, I love breaking that down. Love seeing how that kind of compares to the power rating and which obviously like you expect there to be a difference because it's a different exercise, but it is interesting because I think a lot of people, just general public, tends to think more in terms of like a resume style approach, which again can be right, can be wrong, depending on what you're trying to accomplish. If you're trying to talk about the best teams, then it would be power rating. But if you're trying to talk about who's most deserving for a playoff spot, for instance, that's when the resume would certainly come into play. But it's what makes college football fun. Enjoying talking through this with you, Kelly, and everyone out there. I really enjoy interacting with everyone on Twitter, or 99% of the people on Twitter. So, Kelly, any final thoughts before we wrap up week 8 and start getting ready for week 9?
No, man, like I said, one more week of October before we hit November. It's crazy. The season's flying by, but we're coming into the stretch run, and teams are going to separate themselves, both in the power ratings and the resume rankings. I'm going to try really hard to not clap at people who say, this is the perfect year for the 12-team playoff. Like, it's coming next year. You all got what you wanted. Please let me enjoy the final year of the 4-year playoff and let the 4-year playoff die in peace. I've gotten so many requests, whether it's DMs, texts from friends, or just comments in the public platform about, hey, can what would the most deserving say about the top like a 12-team playoff, and what would the spreads be of this potential top 12 playoff based on your power ratings? I just don't respond to those because I usually try to indulge people and give them what they ask for. I'm just like philosophically opposed to the 12-team playoff, and I know it's coming, and I know we're going to talk about it extensively in future years. And how can you hate more football? I don't hate more football, like, at all. I'm going to enjoy those games. They're going to be fun. I like that the first round at least is tentatively going to be on campus. All those things are good things. What I don't like is what it does to the regular season in terms of the most high stakes games that we have right now. The highest leverage, the biggest impact games that we have right now, those games with regard to postseason implications are going to be diminished. And yes, there is a trade-off there there will be more games overall that have postseason implications because you've expanded the field and now more teams are going to get in. Therefore, more games in which those teams are involved are going to have postseason, leverage. But what I don't like is that these top games, these classic heavyweight games that we're getting during the regular season, these games that really, really, quote, matter to these fans right now, because if we don't win, we won't make the playoff. We lose those games, and it won't, quote, matter if you win or lose because you're, quote, both making the playoff. I'm not saying that that's necessarily my viewpoint. I like the regular season more than anything. I'm still going to value those games, but there is an element of like a safety net. So I'm an Ohio State fan. If Ohio State loses to Penn State on Saturday, it's devastating. Like, you're crushed. You're like, oh my gosh, now it's going to be it's really hard to win the Big Ten. It's really hard to make the CFP. You lose that game in a 12-team playoff. Yeah, man, that stinks. We lost to Penn State. Man, that stinks. We probably won't make it to Indy now. We'll get them back in the playoff. Like, that's going to be the mentality. And you can't not have that, like, as humans, just to know we'll get them back. Like, we're both getting there. We'll get them back. Like, I just hate that. So I'm going to enjoy the 14 playoff. I'm going to ignore the 12-team talk, and we'll talk about 12 teams in 2024.
Real quick, what is your prediction when the first CFP rankings come out next week?
Ooh.
Who's going to be number one? Like, we'll just freeze their resumes for now and not try to predict what's going to happen this coming weekend. But as it stands, who do you think the committee is going to put number one?
I think the committee would put Ohio State number one because the committee likes big wins. They like top 25 wins. Right now, Ohio State's got 2 good ones. They've got, Penn State, and they've got Notre Dame. And it drives me nuts when they say, well, Notre Dame's got to keep winning because they want them to continue to be ranked. Like, that's going to be a good ranked win for Ohio State.
Yeah.
Why does what happens to Notre Dame down the stretch change the team that was on the field in South Bend in week 5? Like, that was a really good team. That was a really high stake game. Everyone remembers like how tense that atmosphere was and the final play of the game. Notre Dame could lose every game the rest of the way, and people say, "Oh, that Notre Dame team's no good." Well, they were pretty darn good the day they played Ohio State. Like, that was a good team. Maybe who are you to say that the game against Ohio State didn't derail Notre Dame's season? And that's why they lost to Louisville. That's why they lost 2 more times the rest of the year if they were to. Like, that's why I like to freeze the value of a win in time, and then retroactively you can upgrade the value. Like if that team ends up getting better and really improving, wow, you beat a really good team. If they get worse, you've still got your frozen value and it's not going to go down. Like every single team either gets credit in my system for how good was the team at the time you played them or how good are they now. Whichever one's better, that's the credit you're going to get. So as a long-winded answer, I think Ohio State's going to be number one because the committee values top 25 wins, good wins. Florida State has some of those too, but I think Ohio State's just resonate more with Penn State and Notre Dame. That's just the way I feel. What about you?
Yeah, I agree. I think Ohio State's going to be number one. I think Florida State would have had a very good case because, like, I've got them number one in my resume rankings. However, my rankings obviously don't take into account the fact that Riley Leonard didn't play for the last quarter and a half or so, and Duke was winning the game when he was on the field. So I think the committee will take those type of things into consideration. If Florida State's number one, I will have no qualms with that. But I do think Ohio State, again, as long as they go to Madison and take care of business against Wisconsin this weekend, I would imagine Ohio State is going to be number one in the first CFP rankings. That's going to do it for the Week 8 recap of Calculated Risk. Make sure you are subscribed to the channel on YouTube, subscribe on your podcast platform of choice. Follow us on Twitter. I'm at TShoeIndex. He's at KFord Ratings. For Kelly Ford, I'm Tyler Shoemaker, and that was Calculated Risk.